So this is the flow that we've made. Whenever a user is either created or activated, a flow is kicked off. There is a security check, and this checks against HaveyoubeenPwned's database to see if the user's email address was found in any data breach. Then there's two options. If the user's email was found, which is the green box over here, there is a notification Teams message sent to a Teams channel. And if the user's email was not found in a breach, then the workflow is complete and nothing happens. So we are going to be building this out from scratch. We are going to be using the API from HaveyoubeenPwned. We'll do some testing, and then we will hop into the Okta workflows console and then actually map this out and then run it and see how we go. This is what HaveyoubeenPwned looks like, and if we were to enter any email address, and let's just, for the sake of this example, say adamsandler@gmail.com and hit on check, we can see all the data breaches that this email was a part of. So from August 2024 till whenever this email was found in a data breach, we can see what was leaked as part of that data breach as well. And we essentially now need to use the API that HaveyoubeenPwned provides and connect it to our Okta workflow. So let's hop into Postman and see how this API works in a GET request. So using the documentation of HaveyoubeenPwned, we have structured this GET request. So the first part is the domain name, HaveyoubeenPwned, and then we have the relative URL that we're using to find out if an email was breached or not. And then we just add the email that we're looking to search for in the end. We also pass the HaveyoubeenPwned API key as part of the request. And this is something that you get after you pay for the platform. It's about $5, pretty inexpensive, and I've hidden this just so no one steals my key. Now, what do we get as a response? We see all the places that Adam Sandler was found, adamsandler@gmail.com was found in a breach, and then we see a status code that says 200 OK, so the request was successful. Now let's try again, and let's change the email address, and let's make it something a bit extensive, something that may not have been breached or may not have even been created. So let's try something really random and see what kind of a response we get. This is what we get as a response. So we get a 404 not found error message. The request was sent, but we did not get a response because this email address was not part of any breach. Now I think we have enough to go off. We have the fact that the status code is 200 if there was in fact a breach containing that email address, and we have a 404 not found if the email address was not part of any breaches. Now what happens if the HaveyoubeenPwned API key is incorrect? We actually get a 401 message, but we're not going to bother with that at the moment. Let's just go with these two values and begin making our Okta flow. We are now in the Okta Workflows console, and there's a few templates that we could use if we wanted to. So there's templates around lifecycle management, governance, security, and also customer identities as well. But we need to make our own connector for the HaveyoubeenPwned API. I've made this earlier and I've tested it. Essentially what I've done is I've made a number of flows that sync with each other, and we have a back and forth communication between the flows, and then they ultimately become a connection that we use in a separate Okta flow. There's 3 flows that I've made that we'll be using in this connection. The first is a helper flow. This is a flow that's called by another flow, it takes input and returns an output. The pawn check, this is the main flow, and this just checks to see if you have been pawned. So this flow calls the helper flow as part of its process. The same for the auth ping flow. This checks to see if the API key is correct and returns a status code. So let's start off with the helper flow. So like I said earlier, the helper flow takes in a number of inputs. So it's called by another flow and it returns an output. The output that this helper flow will return is the status code of that came as a result of this HTTP request. It also will return the headers and the body that come off the back of this HTTP request. This is the same request that we made in Postman, but we're just constructing this within a workflow, within a flow within Okta. So what do we do first? We first construct the URL. We take the domain name of the website and then we add to it the relative URL and then also the user's email. This user's email will come from the attribute of the user created in Okta. So we essentially, the vision is that we connect this to an Okta event and then we read which user was activated and then this input comes from that user's email address. We also construct the HaveyoubeenPwned API key, and this connection is actually the API key, and we need to send this as part of the request to get a response. I've done some wonky concatenation over here, and this is what our header will look like. So this is the structure of the header, and then we've sent in the API key. This could probably be done in a more efficient way, but I've been a bit lazy. So this is the full request. We have the full URL, which comes from here. We have the request method, which would be a get, which would also be taken in as an input. We have a header, which comes from this message, the output. And then we have our merged query, which actually isn't too important in this case because we already have passed the API key as part of the header. The output of this request will be a status code, headers, and a body. And then that's what this flow will return. So let's just hop into the execution history to see how this flow works. I've run this a few times. So this is in the event that there was nothing found. So this is, I think, a similar email address that we checked in Postman. So we got a 404 error message, and what happened? Nothing happened really. The flow, this just did not get passed. What happens when the status code is 200? Let's go over here. And we do have some error handling in another flow that's connected to this. So if you are bothered by the reds, don't worry, because they will not be around in our other flows. So if the status code is 200, like adamsandler@gmail.com has been found in several breaches, what happens then? What happens then is we get, as an output of this flow, a status code and some content in the header and then some content in the body. So let's use this as part of another flow. We are back in our flows section and let's go to this auth ping flow. This flow checks to see if the API key is correct. This API key comes from the configuration that we make for this connector, and I'll show you how this is done towards the end. So the API key comes in from that connection, from the configuration that we've done, and the first card that we do is a try or if error card But let me just show you the output of this flow first. So the output is whether or not the API key works or not. If with the helper flow, we add in a relative URL and put in a get as a request method, pass in the API key as part of the header. If everything, if the status code is 200, then we'll say the connection is successful. So if we go over here, if we go to view outputs, we can see that this status code over here will get passed to this output. In the event of an error, we will construct an error message based on the error that we get. So we'll take part of the description and we'll take a message from the error, and then we'll concatenate them both, pass it, make it an output, and then pass that to this message area over here. So these are the messages that will be sent based on what happens. If there's an error, this is the message that is going to be forwarded. But if the flow works as intended, then the connection is successful is the message that will be part of this output. Likewise, the status code, if it's 200, if it works, it's 200, that's the status code that will be passed to the next card. But if there's an error message, we will just be passing the status code of the error message to the next card. What we've done next is we are comparing to see if the status code equals to 200, because we only really care about the status code. We're not really looking at any other details at the moment. And this is a true or false card. So if the status code is 200, we're just going to say that this is true and it's working, otherwise false. So we are going to construct a message based on the status code and the output that we got from either scenario. And then we'll name this service response. And then the end of the flow is whether or not the API or the flow worked, and then the service response. So this service response could be a 401 or a 404 or a 200, as well as the message. So it was successful or 404 not found. And then this working would either be a true or a false. So let's go to the execution history and see what this looks like. And you can see, by the way, this is what I meant by the reds are going away. So because we've done some error handling, this flow shows to be a success regardless of what happens. So if we enter in an email that was not part of a breach, this is the output of that scenario. It gets passed to this true or false card. 404 does not equal to 200, so working is false. We construct this object, and the end outcome of this flow is that status code 404 message HTTP request error 404 not found, and working is false. In the event that everything works, let's see what happens. So everything works. You go to the try card. The message that we get is the connection is successful. Once we go to outputs, the status code is 200, and the message is the connection is successful. 200 does equal to 200, so working is true. And then the end output that we get is working is true, status code 200, message, the connection is successful. So now we've got two flows. We've got a helper flow and we've got an auth ping flow. This flow checks to see if the API works and has some error handling. So now we need one last flow to make everything work together. We are back in our Okta workflows dashboard, and this is a flow within the connector builder. And this is our last flow that we need as part of this connection to make this work. So this flow is called pawn check, and what it does is it takes in the HaveyoubeenPwned API key as well as an email address as an input. It then calls the helper flow. It passes in this relative URL to the helper flow. It also describes that the request method is a get. It passes an email address to the helper flow, and it also passes so from auth ping. So this API key is coming from the auth ping flow. So this auth ping flow or on-demand action connector passes the API key to the helper flow, and then like we did in the auth ping flow, if everything goes well and as intended, we will just say all good, and we'll call this input 1. And we'll construct a message. So we'll just say that the status code from here, if everything works, goes to this message. And if there's an error, we'll just say 404, and we will pass this to the output message of this flow. That's all we care about, just the status code and the error message / code. Then what we're going to do towards the end is just output the status code. So we could output the body and everything else, but we just care if it's a 200 or not. So we're just going to pass a numerical value. It's actually a numerical value, but it's coming from a text component, but that's fine. It still works. And later on, we'll just compare to see if it's a 200 or not. And then based on that, we'll do some different actions. So let's just go to execution history and see how this works. So in the event where an email address has not been pawned, what happens? So it goes to the error handling mechanism. We'll just say 404 as an output, and we will pass that to let me just go back over here. So we'll pass that over here to this. So we'll pass this 404 message. So we say 404, and we'll pass that message right over here from this card to the flow output. And we can see this is what happens in this instance. If everything works, so if like adamsandler@gmail.com has been pawned in the past, so what will happen? We'll get a status code of 200. We'll say, hey, all good, and we'll pass the status code of 200 to this message output. This will then flow into this output. So we'll just say status code 200, and this is the output of the flow. So we have two possible outcomes, either a 404 or a 200. We're actually not taking into consideration a 401, and that is just a design choice. So let's actually configure this. So what we need to do next is we need to add in the API key of HaveyoubeenPwned as part of this authentication area. I'm not going to show you how to do this because this video is already getting quite long. We will then deploy this, so we can create a test version and then deploy this. And then once it's deployed, we can use it as part of a flow. So let's go to our flow section. There's a bunch of other flows that I've made here too, but this is where I've used the new connection of HaveyoubeenPwned. So an overview of how the flow works. Once a user is activated, their profile is read and their username is passed to HaveyoubeenPwned. This then checks to see if they have been pawned, and it returns a status code as an output. We check to see if that status code is equal to 200. If not, then we just say, hey, user is fine, and the flow ends. If it is, we'll just say, damn, looks like username may be sus, and we'll send this output, damn, looks like username may be sus, in a Teams channel as a message. So I'm just going to very quickly touch on the error handling over here. So the output that we get from everything working as expected is the status code. And in the event of an error, I've just done some random stuff over here. In the event of an error, I'm just going to pass a random integer between 100 and 600 because I really don't care about the value of an error, and I'm just going to say random. And this status code, when it gets passed over here, if it does not equal to 200, the message will be user is fine, and the flow just ends. So it'll never actually get to a Teams message. This is where the flow will just end. So in my Okta dashboard, I'm just going to make a random user. We're just going to say Adam Sandler test as a first name, and we'll use the same as a last name. And in the email address, we'll just say adamsandler@gmail.com. We know for sure this email address was found in a data breach, and we will just activate this user. So we'll save. Now let's just see the execution history of this flow. So adamsandler@gmail.com, we know from Postman and from searching up that this user was pawned. The status code was 200. This was then compared, and then this message should have been composed. Damn, looks like Adam Sandler may be sus, and it should have been sent as a Teams message on a channel. In another scenario, we tried out putting in Adam Sandler 124 and a bunch of other numbers. This was found to have not been pawned, and then the flow just ended with user is fine. So let's just hop into Teams and see what happened. So this is our view in Teams, and what do you know, we got this message. Damn, looks like Adam Sandler at gmail.com may be sus. So this is an example of an Okta workflow triggering when a user is either created or activated, and using HaveyoubeenPwned to determine whether or not an email has been breached in the past. I hope you enjoyed this video, and feel free to ask any questions in the comments or give any ideas as to what kind of videos you would like to see next.